Thank you for joining us today on behalf of the Australian Society for Professional Research. Our society, I'll just give you a quick overview of this society, and then after that I will introduce our invited speaker. It's an old society in Australia. It started in 1972. We have approximately 400 members nationally, and the society is an official member of FEAST, which is a forum for European Australia Science and Technology Cooperation, as well as NFORMS, which is the International Federation for Operations Research Society. We have an annual conference. This year we will have the 23rd annual conference, and it's going to take place in the Gold Coast. And it's going to be in collaboration with MOTSEM, the Modeling and Simulation Society, as well as DOLS, which is the Defense Operation Research Symposium, which is run by the AEST. ACT chapter is one of the oldest chapter in the society. We had almost like resurrected the chapter in 2015, and today is our first main event to open the seminar series, and we are hoping that every 2 months we will have a plenary speaker to come and talk to us about this field. Our focus is analytics, and it's today, the focus of today's seminar is our theme in the society, the evidence-based decision-making and policy. We offer free memberships for students, but if you're not a student, you will pay a little bit, the cost is not high, and we would like to welcome all of you to join the society. You will be getting a piece of paper for feedback, so if you don't mind, at the end of today, I would appreciate it if you give us feedback, and you can put it outside. So our speaker today doesn't need an introduction, but it's my duty and my job to introduce him. Dr. Alex Zelinsky, who he started pretty much with a Bachelor of Mathematical Sciences from the University of Wollongong, and continued with a PhD. After completing his PhD, he went to PhD in industry. Then he continued with University of Wollongong and worked in Japan. Then he came to ACT, moving to the Australian National University. He was a professor of system engineering at ANU. While at ANU, he commenced, and he was a co-founder for a company called Sync Machine, and he became the chief executive officer of the Sync Machine. Then he moved to CSIRO to become the group executive for information sciences, as well as the director of the ICT center at CSIRO. And in March 2012, he moved to DSTO as our chief defense scientist. We are talking about evidence-based today, and when I looked at Dr. Zelinsky's CV, it's full of evidence. The list of awards that he obtained, I'm really jealous. I'm jealous, and I'm looking forward as an academic to be inspired by what he achieved. He is a fellow of the IEEE, a fellow of ATSI, and a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. And a very long list of awards. The Engineer of the Year for the Sydney Division in 2002, Eureka Prize in 2002, the I Awards in 2009. It is just an amazing long list of awards. So if we have someone to talk to us about evidence, I can't think of any better speaker than our chief defense scientist today. So without any further ado, please join me to welcome Dr. Alex.
Zelina. It was way too much information, way too much evidence. Yeah. But thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you, Hussein, for organising or reorganising the local chapter, and good to see the Australian Society for Operations Research becoming more involved with things and trying to show leadership. And I think we need more people involved. And it's great to see you've got 400 members. I'm very pleased with that. So, is this ready to go? Do I need to switch something for me? It's all right. So, okay, thanks. Very good. And so, look, I've got a presentation to make. I think it's a small group here, so if you really want to interrupt me, ask me a question, I'm reasonably happy to do that. And what's the format with the reorganised ASOR ACG chapter? How do you
We'll try to keep the questions
to the end, okay, all right.
It's up to you.
Okay, all right. If you've got a burning question, you can interrupt me. Okay, so I think when I was asked by Hussein to give this talk, I think we talked about evidence-based policy making. And interestingly, when you're working in government, sometimes it feels like it's opinion-based policy making, but and a lot in defence, there's a lot of people with no opinions, so it makes for an interesting idea. We do certainly contest ideas. That's the good thing about it. So it's not just uninformed opinions. So I think people are informed, but I think that it's really about how can you improve the decision making, and particularly when there's million-dollar decisions or lives on the line. So I think that that's what we're interested in. So I'd like to give you a bit of a rundown through that. But one of the key aspects of this is the DSTO kind of roles, and we talk about what we do for our defence clients, be it supporting operations at the very heart of what we do. So you can see that the business of operations research would actually sit very nicely there. In fact, it does, in terms of analysing how to conduct operations, logistics, analysing campaigns, all those sort of things, and then providing advice around sustainment and how to keep things going. We certainly have a lot of experience in. I think Australia is one of those key national capabilities is to wring the life out of military platforms and let's keep them going as long as possible. But you always want to do that safely, and operations research plays a real role in that, as well as acquisitions, trying to decide how many things you need to get. And a lot of people just have a number in mind, like 100 of this or 10 of those, but really you really got to go back to the requirements and understand what it is. And then future proofing is very important. And we also conduct strategic research in parts of operations research, and I'll come back to that. But one of our most important things is, I think, in defence is delivering valued scientific advice, as well as innovative technology solutions. But the OR plays a real big role in the valued scientific advice, and so it's probably the biggest underpinning science in defence. I'd like to, when we were preparing this talk, it was that we looked up a bit of the documentation, and although this is a document or a project, APS 200 was a project that was started by the previous government. However, but the intent of it is still valid today, and they said that policy making with the APS needs to be based on rigorous evidence-based approach that is routine and systematic, draws upon science as a key element. That was very important, and I think those 5 bullet points of timeliness, cultural challenges, relationships, timeframes, access, they really do count. And it's a great way to think about how we in DSTO see our role in the Department of Defence, and it's very interesting about meeting, getting the advice in at the right time. And sometimes we just don't have time to do a full analysis. It can take half a year, so you have to work in much shorter time frames. And as we had to do with the search of the MH370, the DSTO was asked to analyse a lot of the data. And you've probably seen over time the search areas kept moving. That's actually based on more information DSTO has been able to get and help reassess these things. And in the end, DSTO assessments have been actually used as the basis for the current search area, because I think we've been able to prove that a lot of the analysis that was done previously was, well, incomplete, simplistic, etc. So that's important. Cultural, I think I always think of this as like warfighter meets boffin, you know, and how do you get to people in uniform the ideas of what you want to do in terms of an analysis, and that really does require different ways of looking at things, and there are different cultures certainly in scientific communities versus the Australian Defence Force. But the important point, as I said, was the relationships, building on trust and delivery. I think you build relationships over time, and you just come in and say, I've got an answer here. That doesn't get you far. You've got to really take the long-term view in this regard. And I think that the time frames, as I said, is very important. You know? Be able to take the long view, but also be able to work on short time frames as required. And I think getting hold of data is so important. And too often we don't have the data and we still want to make the decisions. And it's sometimes better to, even if you make a decision quickly, but then to get the data to see if you can validate the decision or change things as we move along. So this is very much, as I said there in the bottom bullet point, a way that we work in DSTO. So it's a very nice project framework, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in advising government. And one of the big interesting elements of this is the Australian policy cycle. And you know, basically policies are about, you know, putting in place a government decision which will change things or inform things. And it's like, if you think about now, as one of my things, my kids are talking to my older kids, and they're talking about whether to buy real estate. It's a really interesting question. There's a father saying, well, maybe it's the top of a boom. Is it really a boom? And then you think, how does the government decide what to do in this space? So that's a formulation, and then you go out, and if you're going to change, say, negative gearing, you need to go out and consult, and then you try to make a decision and evaluate its effectiveness, etc. But what I'm always interested is in the anticipation element. This is where we and science and technology have this push and pull. You can anticipate an issue and start to be pushing it along in advance of things occurring. And you know, so you might say that climate change is a push by scientists, but pull may be actually responding to a particular decision. This has been gone through an auto build, good. And so the important point is that you move through this cycle. And the important point, I think, is also to be quickly trying to understand what the risks and the dollars are that it's associated. So at the end of the day, a policy is all about improved effectiveness and efficiency of government programs. That's what we're all about. You want to make sure taxpayers' dollars are put to use properly and effectively. And that means you need to have an idea about what you're going to save, potentially maybe in the acquisition, or create value in terms of, it could be the other way in saving dollars, but also the other important point is risk. Risk to the environment, financial risk, or people, human risks to people's actual safety. And of course then there's a real options analysis, and I think this is a really important point where science can make a difference, particularly our people thinking about broadly about what are all the possible options and how do you classify them into appropriate classes which you could then do an analysis on. And I think the testing the strengths of someone goes off and says, well, we've done some analysis of these options, to actually go back and see if they hold up. I think there's a good piece of work just done recently, the Grattan Institute, looking at renewable energy. And what is it better that you give people money to do renewable energy in the home, or you let state-based systems where state or electricity providers are given money to provide renewable sources, and to see where things are going. And it's just interesting that they made the conclusion after doing the analysis is that basically the community has been paying people to install relatively inefficient systems in their homes, and it would have probably been better to build big solar farms or whatever other renewable wind farms, etc. But that only is not very obvious when people debate these things in the public, but actually when someone sits back and looks at the data and see what were the options, and to actually then with clarity argue what's in the public good, because at the end of the day these were taxpayer dollars that were pushed into this, and they said it was a cross-subsidy of at least 9 billion. No one knew that at the time, but that's important, and I think that actually shows how you can do this. And of course, scrutiny, decision support. And I think one of the big things is, I think as a OA person, you should be really, or OR person, you should be really looking at how to visualise your results. I don't think people are, most people these days, certainly decision makers, don't have time to look through a very detailed report, very verbose, comparing variables, discussing trade-offs. In the end, the art of actually being able to just display the result in a visual form is very, very powerful. And of course, there's the analysis that sits behind that and argues the case, but as a one-pager, that's quite striking. And that leads to, obviously, metrics which can actually, rules of thumb that you can actually allow people to quickly make decisions or work through themselves the options that are there. This is a very good diagram, and I like this in terms of, it talks about what we should be doing. So this work came out 3 years ago and still available on the internet, and I commend it to you to have a look at it. So so decisions is about judgment plus evidence, and sometimes we find that evidence in that equation is 0, so it's all about judgment, which isn't really an opinion in the end of the day, but I think we've got to try to bring that in. But one of the interesting things that I've noticed working with scientists over the years is scientists want to bring all the evidence in because they want to make the right decision. And because if you have all the information you need about a particular matter, then you can make the right call. But then it calls into account timeliness and cost of gathering all that data. So maybe you can only get 80% of the data. So that could probably inform you, and you can still make the right decision. So that's where that judgment issue comes in. But time, complexity, risk, cost, go back to the culture. And access to expertise, so can you get to the experts who will give you the expertise, or people who are potentially worked in this area for a long, long time, obviously can execute very good judgment. So you might, if you had like a Warren Buffett to advise you on financial decisions about buying property or not buying property, it's much more important than the evidence of what's going on in the market in some case. But then you really have to have a very fine, that's a fine example. So there are those extreme cases, but I think in the middle ground, being able to bring evidence to support judgment is what this is all about. And that's where we see ourselves in ASOR playing a role. It's really interesting is this has been recognised more recently by the various audits. The Australian Infrastructure Audit, which reported in April of this year, said establishing a robust, accessible evidence base to support decisions on infrastructure reforms and investments is critical. And it goes on to say that if you don't do this, and these sort of decisions, infrastructure is generally billions of dollars. And you spend billions of dollars on one piece of infrastructure, it means you can't build something else. And there's very interesting debates over things like the NBN, and should we have built it or not? Now we've got Netflix, everyone wants NBN. So, but at the time, it was very controversial. And one of the important things was the previous government pursued a very idealistic kind of approach that you need fibre to the home or fibre to the premises, and that would deliver the ultimate broadband network. But they were not able to get any early wins, so people thought, where's my money going to? Well, this current government is using an approach which is a hybridised approach. So if there's something already there that can be adapted, then you use it. So they're rolling out a mixture of approaches and are trying to use Telstra's copper networks in some places. But every time they build a new building, it's mandated you put fibre in that new building, and certainly like big apartment blocks in Sydney, etc. So that infrastructure decisions are being made, and they'll probably have to reinstall something twice over the life of the NBN. But now, I think people recognise that that's a piece of very important infrastructure. Yet the debate we had in Australia was very uninformed in that sense, and there wasn't really a cost-benefit analysis or working out what's the best way to do it. And nowadays, no one even talks about EMD. You know, and it's just recognized. But it's interesting when people now are seeing the value of this thing. But this is after the demand has gone up. And by the way, Australia is still the 44th country for the slowest internet in the world. So we've got a long way to go in terms of picking up. At least we've got the right public policy setting now. But the point is that you need evidence base for this. It's a good example where you need that for infrastructure investment. And you know, even here in the ACT, there's a big debate going on about to build a light rail between the centre of town and Canberra. I suppose if you're living in Canberra, you probably think it's a good idea, but others may not. But how do you make that decision? And I think that it'd be great to see more operations research being involved. In fact, I recommend this community here volunteer, try to help the government, try to understand what this is. I suspect there is also a bit of opinion in that, and it seems to be very much polarised, and we haven't really seen the real OA or OR work going on. The interesting one is that sometimes when you do science, you can get it wrong. Great example, 1921, we banned New Zealand apples coming into this country because they had disease. And then we then upheld that decision through many sort of studies. But the New Zealanders never really accepted, certainly, our judgment on that, and took us to court. And in the World Trade Organisation upheld their work because it was based on a pretty dodgy analysis. So you can, if you do dodgy analysis, people can use that to underturn decisions. But I think it was just as much based on people wanting to protect local markets from export, and it was hiding behind regulation. And so it's interesting. So you can actually take those sort of decisions and turn them on their head. But there's been many examples of that. I think if you think back into 1935, we introduced 100 cane toads to Queensland to control native beetles, which are detrimental to cane crops. But interesting, this Australian, and this came from Brazil, but the cane in Australia is slightly taller than Central America's, where the cane toads came. So the cane toads couldn't even reach the beetles they were introduced to get. So, and now we've got over 220 million of these guys. So it would have been interesting to have a look at, someone did an analysis and properly considered those sort of policy decisions rather than decisions on the fly. So let's moving on. One of the things I'll just very quickly touch on is the first principles review. So this is going to have major implications for the Department of Defence and significant reform for everyone, including DSTO. But some of the aspects, I believe, of the reform will require us to have more operations research capability, more ability to make decisions about particularly the acquisition capability and sustainment. So really interestingly, when you look at the first principles review, it sort of talks about these are the 5 strategic challenges. You know, capability modernisation. This is, you know, we're embarking on a very big program that is going to be the most ambitious ever in Australia's military history in terms of size of the equipment and complexity of it. And so given that, you really have some challenges around effectiveness and efficiency of that. And then the second challenge is rapid technology change. You know, that is driving the defence capability for the future. And the speed of that occurring, you can just see it in the consumer world of electronics and what's happening there, the rate that's happening. That will only come across into our portfolio. So how do you leverage that? Budget uncertainties, we've seen a lot of that over the last 5 years. And even the federal government budget, even though they have desire to put more money to defence, they may be prevented by sheer domestic politics of the budget not being able to get it back into a surplus in a particular time. So that could flow back to us. The other big driver is economic growth in our region. Countries, our new neighbours, their economies are growing. They can be able to have greater budgets themselves and more disposable income to buy highly capable military platforms. and many other suppliers other than US and Europe. And of course, there's a demand for greater responses for us in regional crises. And it's only a good example. We thought we left the Middle East, just brought Afghanistan back into Iraq for a third time, and those type of things will grow. Now, that's the sort of the big picture, but you might say which parts have science and technology implications just out of this element. And here are some of them. Certainly big complex portfolio. How would you decide what to get? I think operations research would be right there, as well as also looking at cost efficiencies and of leveraging new technologies that are coming available in the broader consumer world. So let's move on and talk about some of the drivers for evidence-based decision in here. And you can see that you've got the bits in red there. Just about every part of these 5 strategic challenges would require evidence-based decisions, and understanding, even if you had to deploy forces, how do you do that? And that's where our operations analysts are using the most modern OR techniques would be provide valuable input. So we now have this new process it's a 3-stage process of defining capability. So I won't try to give you a lecture on this. It's a work in progress even in the Department of Defence, but the idea is there's 3 levels of contestability in acquisition and sustainment. So every service chief now is a capability manager. They can propose what they would like going forward. So, the Chief of Army, I see people in red here, may ask for more tanks, and that would be a potential requirement that the Chief of Army could put, but that would be moderated by the Vice Chief of Defence Force, looking at the joint capabilities. How does that fit into the whole joint capability? So that would be actually almost like a gate 0. So you're starting to think about, do you actually think that there is something here to require? And at that point, it won't be just coming along with the Chief of Army, using an example, wants tanks. It'll actually be, what sort of capability do you want? What mix do you want? What are the options? And if that then is put in a credible way, then there is money and budget and time allocated to go off and explore these options. So rather than saying, I've already got a solution I'd like to buy, it's a gleam in my eye, I want that. It'll actually be, first of all that will be moderated, and then the idea was the first decision is gate 0 is come up with the options and give people money to explore the options. So a good example of that would be, let's take the example of submarines. There was always talk about what are we going to acquire, but now there is an evaluation, competitive evaluation between Germany, France, and Japan around 3 potential aspects. And those 3 countries, the industries in those 3 countries, are going to be given a budget to work up options about what they think they could offer in submarines. And then they would then pass through to the next bit, which is contestability. So, and in fact, that's more like pass 1. So approval, I can't read this, to develop options to an agreed standard of fidelity and set date and within a set budget. So that's what we're kind of working to with the submarines at this stage. We certainly decide what were the potential options and then put forward that. And then ultimately you move to approval of a refined option, which then goes to government and is set within a particular budget. So this is a much more staged way, and there's contestability all the way along. So in other words, it's not that once you've got the green flag to look at, the way we can currently acquire things is as soon as you get the ability to acquire something, it's more or less set in stone and in place, and it follows through, even if other better options appear in time, because some of our acquisition can take 7 to 10 years. So this is a more reformed process. So hopefully you'll see this flowing through, but the important point here is that all through this, I would hope that you could see the value of operations research becoming used and applied. And inherently, what's the big issue here? Well, I guess some defence projects are complex, very complex, and we've seen many examples of wrong decision costing millions and millions of dollars. So certainly the early airborne warning control AWACS, that caused quite a bit of trouble. The contracts weren't properly specified over the radar technologies, and it cost us a lot of time and money both for the Boeing and Northrop Grumman and the Australian Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force. So these things have been shown, and also, of course, if you could procure, there are platforms which could be potentially dangerous in certain scenarios or are unsafe to operate. And we've seen that before when we've procured naval vessels which just don't operate in those conditions that they're operating into today. Certainly our patrol boats that we use in the northwest, they don't actually operate in a way we designed them to, and in fact there's been issues with their viability. They won't see through the life of 20 years or 25 years that they were designed for. It'll be much, much less. So let me move on and see how much of the time. I want to make sure we get some time for questions. Look, just to go through some of our roles where DSTO plays a role has been certainly supporting the mission, and we've been doing that for the last 15 years. Certainly mainly in the Middle East of late, but before that in Timor, East Timor and the Solomons. But one of the things that we've responded to is the rapid capability analysis and insertion to protect soldiers against improvised explosive devices. So that is actually, what do you do with those threats? We've worked up electronic countermeasures against that, but also understanding, for instance, what sort of detector, handheld detector could you use? What's the most effective one to work against the current threats there? Part of the problem is that each of these devices work slightly differently. The environment or the ground that the explosives are left in are variable. So a lot of these things we had were people saying opinions, this one's better than that one. And yet at the end of the day, you're there to protect the soldiers. And there were certain ones, we got involved in this, certain detectors were popular with special forces, and it was really because you could fold it up and put it in one of your side pockets. And that was from an operation ease point of view, it was very good, but actually operationally the sensor was quite poor. And quite a few of those guys did get blown up by improvised explosive devices. So we actually moved very quickly to actually analyse which were the best ones to use, and had recommended that some of these detectors be removed out of service because they were literally not operationally suited to the task. So that's important for and to do that study and then factually be able to prove it, because it is a probabilistic element to this, and be able to show what the studies, what it is to do. And so this idea of knowing what to buy, what to use, what to keep is quite an important role that science can play a role in. And we'll keep doing this type of work going forward. Also being a smart buyer, the Joint Strike Fighter, should that be acquired as a, and based on that decision wasn't based on the Chief of Air Force saying, I want the latest and greatest weapon out there available. So it was actually really understanding, first of all, through intelligence reports, where jet or fighter jet technology was moving to with the 4th and 5th generation threat assessment. Once we knew where other people were building capability, which we may have to encounter, what would be the type of capabilities you would need in an Australian Defence Force to be able to counter that. And that then starts to help drive these elements. And this came back through gave us a sense of what the concept of operation, we needed understanding that we needed beyond line of sight communications. That means you need SATCOM, you needed a very advanced form of radar and electronic warfare. So radars that can actually take out or jam your opponents or even interfere with their radar ground stations. Where do you get that type of technology? And of course, interoperability and also range assessments. All this was taken into account to decide which particular platform we wanted and how we would go about it and why. Because you go to Cabinet and you say, here's an $18 billion decision to buy this platform. How do you actually defend that decision? And this was the argument that was put, and a lot of that was based on the STO operations analysis, operations research work. Another one was, we recently, the Navy combat helicopter fleet. How do you know how many helicopters you need to purchase there? And there was quite a debate over that. And our guys actually were very good. This is David Marlowe. And David, I spoke to him just recently, last week. I saw him. He's currently in the US doing a study work at the Naval College. And David actually looked at this problem from trying to understand how many helicopters would you need per day over a 30-year period, given that some would need to be in maintenance, some would break down. What were the different size options? And to do this in a way, of course, you can just buy lots more helicopters. That's one way of doing this. And work for some sort of worst case scenario. That can easily be worked out. But that can potentially cost the taxpayer billions of dollars extra. So David actually did an analysis and using, he was used approximate dynamic programming, rolling horizons, simulation optimization methods, and he's actually studied those quite actively. He's published with those methods. But the key was, how do you do operations analysis under uncertainty? That's a bit of a challenge in the field, and he did a lot of this, and he worked out that there's basically helicopters in one of 6 states, being in maintenance and operation, etc. So, and the answer is, it looks like it's 42 there, but the answer is actually 24. And yes, people in my office has got all the time just in animation. But anyway, but this is a good example. But the idea was that the fleet size options, they had a requirement of 4,000 hours. So if you had 4,000 hours available to the Chief of the Navy, what would it be? And you can see those various curves, etc. So this is a great piece of work by David Marlowe and his team, and he can definitely give you an argument about why you need those number of helicopters. And the same goes for numbers of submarines. We can do all those analyses based on the requirements of the mission, and you can stand up to scrutiny, and that's so important. Another example is sustainment. So I've talked about operations, I've talked about acquisition, the other one is sustainment, keeping things going. Just very interestingly, again, DSTO folk worked up a new paint, polyurethane paint. And and part of it is that storm grey is the colour we've always used. It came from the Royal Navy, and but that was, so we just inherited it and used their colour. But actually, it's not really suited to the sort of UV and light conditions and the conditions of our ocean, our seas in the southern hemisphere. And we certainly don't have those rolling fogs and terrible grey sort of weather you can get in the Atlantic, etc. So, very interestingly, in the analysis our guys did about what was the first, get the right colour. And so they came up with haze grey, and particularly, which is more where our operations would be, is in Northern Australia. But then they also worked out a better paint, and it was more durable, less toxic. And the other important one was low solar absorbing. So basically, this paint would absorb less heat, and so the thermal signature of that platform went down considerably. And overall higher quality at a reduced or same cost. So over the next few years, the Royal Australian Navy will all be repainted into haze grey, and that's based on analysis done by AEST and working closely with the material scientists to get the right colour, but also not only get the right colour, but get the right material properties for that. So excellent piece of work done there. So, all right, so then we move on. We also do, one of the other important points that operations analysts can do is start to be futurists. Think about what is going to happen with trends. We all know about things such as trends with population growing, over 9 billion potentially, mega cities of over 20 million appearing, shortage of water, climate change, those sort of things. But what could actually occur in a technology sense? And they talked about a study. The study's available. It's been released. It was released late last year. It's available on our internet with the AEST. But it's talking about how we're increasingly trusting in technology. People just rely on it. And you can just imagine if, we've seen what happens when people just lose electricity for a few days, and it's in, what happens in that regard. Complexity, things are getting more complicated. Countries like Australia need to be a smart power. In other words, you've got capability as a country, but you also got people who are very skilled workforce. So it's not like it's being a knowledge power in the sense of being able to advocate science diplomacy, work with near neighbours, and you don't just rely on hard power. So you've got some capabilities, but you can actually use your inherent know-how, knowledge, science and technology capabilities, and the value of innovation in enterprise. Innovation is becoming increasingly a game changer. Countries like Israel adopt innovation big time, and they are changing the capability of their defence force and their country's economy. So the work that we did in Forward 2035 has gone forward into our white paper, which is under development now. So that is a form of shaping of some of the strategic options that are coming in, to think about what we need to in the long term. Now, science foundations are broad in defence. These are all the DSTO capabilities that exist, and we have a joint operations analysis division which is focused around the capabilities of exist there around the aerospace, land capability, maritime capability, and also joint capability as well as strategic analysis, and decision sciences. But the big thing that we see for our way is big data analytics. It's not a surprise. In fact, I was just talking to Paul Whitbread out there. He was taking a course at John Hopkins on data analytics, and he said when he did the course that it was just like OA really, but just with lots of data, and a lot of that data was interconnected with other data. But so I think that this is a place where OA people can go. Cloud computing, that means all this data will be available on tap. Visualization, people are expecting to have more interactive tools rather than just give you a graph and you just print it. You can actually start to play with those parameters. It's very interesting. You can see that kind of stuff is happening with some of the online subscriptions. I subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald, and quite often they have these little, almost like little app, you tap and they show some different analysis where you can invert the data to view it from a different way. The behavioural representation, particularly in people, what are we seeing? I think that's a very important issue. And of course, robust analysis and optimisation, but under uncertainty. We know that nothing is certain, and being able to model uncertainty into our OA work is really the next big challenge. And now our methods now starting to emerge, and we certainly did that in our helicopter fleet sizing work for the Navy. But importantly, you can't work without industry, so we really do need to improve our partnerships with industry, and we're doing that in a fairly significant way, and also working with other major R&D organisations such as CSIRO and the DMTC. And also, of course, working with universities, and we now have defence science partnerships in place, a new business model around IP, which has always been a bit of a showstopper for us. And in fact, Glenn Sharker is here. If you want to strike an agreement with him, he's the man for defence science partnerships. He's got a checkbook there. Oh no, but he's got some brochures. But I think Len and his team have been able to get I think it's now 25 universities, so it's a bit dated, this slide, but signed up on the same terms and conditions, same overheads, same way of doing business. So for us in defence, it's really easy. That means you don't have to think of getting lawyers every time you want to do a project. And what takes months now takes weeks. And that means you can do more work, more collaboration. And under this model, we're also offering researchers out of institutions to come inside defence and inside DSTO to do classified work. Obviously you need to get a security clearance, but we used to, in the past, spend lots of time thinking about how to turn a classified problem into some benign, unclassified problem that people would work on, and then you take that solution and then start redoing the work again. So now we're actually saying, we haven't got time to do that, we'll bring in the best people to help us. So lots of opportunities in the OA space. And so I think this closer linkages between policy agendas and the scientific community needs to occur. I've got to say, my feeling is, still in Australia, this country particularly, when we compare ourselves to others, I think the two circles sit further apart. There is some overlap. I'd like it to be more like how it's drawn here, but generally we don't take a lot of account into the science and technology decisions, into guiding decisions. Usually it's after the fact we realise there's a mistake, then science is brought in to solve the problem, which is okay too. Everyone's happy to come in and say, well, thank you for asking us now, but we're happy to do that at any stage. But it could actually be much more productive for everyone if we did it earlier. But so I think building capacity through collaboration is the key, so we need more people. I think ASOR with its 400 members might be a place to look for more partnerships. So Hussein, so with your team, we'd like to do that, explore that with you. And hopefully we get better outcomes and get people working on the right problems. So with that, I'll finish there, and thank you for your attention and coming in on Tuesday night. Thank you very much.
So we'll open the floor for some questions, please.
Dr. Zelinsky, thank you for your informative and thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you.
Group Captain Martin Cullum, Director of Strategic Design in Air Force. We work closely with Brian Hanlon's team, providing us good support to an important body of work. In light of the First Principles Review, where do you see the role of JOAC within the DSTO's complete program and its relationship to the other 6 divisions?
That's a good question. Look, I think that a lot of things won't change that much. I think the contestability function is work to be done. I think DSTO can be potentially, if they're helping, say, capability managers such as in the RAF to acquire or work up options around new capability, or helping you develop the technology with it. And then on the contestability side, we're also contesting that advice. So you're in one man, you're a poacher and gamekeeper. So we'll have to have some sort of function that it seems to sit in. I imagine it'll probably sit, the policy intelligence group will probably have a technical group there of sorts, because they don't have that capability. I think the worst thing would be to go and build a new capability. So I would imagine maybe people from JOAD and others could get rotated through as advisors. So the way I see that the policy and intelligence group offering that contestability function would be, you've got finance, you've got financial risk, you've got technical risk, and then you've got strategic risk. So strategic they'll handle off easily. Financial you can probably get, the CFO group helping in there. So technical risk, I think that's where DSTO plays into that to a certain degree. I think the acquisition group may also contribute to that, but given what's happening to this acquisition sustainment group in terms of being rebuilt or repositioned, I think it's a work in progress.
Because from an Air Force perspective, we've made the easy decisions, which big bits of kit to buy, and also make them work together.
Exactly. That's the interoperability bit. I've got to say that's probably one of the things we can continually gets missed And I think that's where we lose, that we don't get all the value we could out of an acquisition.
It's a much more complex decision space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the Singaporeans and the Israelis do it really well. Everything just talks to everything, and they have a very significant integration capability which sits inside their government. And then only after they've worked out how it's done, then they task a commercial contractor to implement the last bits, but a lot of that work is done inside. Interestingly, I was last week I was in Pax River and visiting Navarre, and they're doing all the integration themselves on the P8s, etc., because they just don't think, well, we can ask these other companies to do it, they'll cost more and won't necessarily be better, and here we're going to make sure that everything talks to what needs to talk to, etc. So very interesting how that is done. Unfortunately, I think Australia just is not thinking that way. We regard procurement as procurement of that particular platform.
Yeah, I think we're going through a line
shift at the moment. Of course, look, I think program, it's a Jericho opera. Yeah, that's a great program, and that was announced by the previous or current Chief of Air Force. And hopefully, the next one will carry it on. So that's the important thing. But we're right there to obviously help that. But I think you're absolutely right. Interoperability is key. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. As a PhD student, it took me a while to find a good topic, just to apply my knowledge. Even though I at that time, even though I had great knowledge in the area of optimization under uncertainty and that sort of things, but I was desperately looking for a topic and a real problem until my supervisor gave me on. Well, here my point is that there are a lot of researchers, and their main problem is that people in the area of operations research have made a great deal of knowledge, but they just don't know what problem they can apply the knowledge to. So I'm just curious why you don't specify some problems in the community, in a website, or whatever it is, to hire or recruit, or just introduce it to the PhD students, to researchers, to the faculty members, specific problems, so they can understand your problem and then apply their knowledge. I think the gap between operations with people from the area of operations research and your problems is that we just don't understand what you need.
So that comes from engagement, and I think that's one of the hard parts of any science in any discipline really, is to understand how do you apply your basic mathematical tools or knowledge that you've learned, how do you apply it to a business effectively. So defence is a business. So generally you need to have a knowledge of the business, and the business can be learnt, but it takes a long time. I mean, at ADFA there is probably, they've got probably more prospects because they do work, training for people to work in that workforce. But many of the universities will not have that. I think one of the things to do is, if you wanted to find a problem, you could come, talk to people inside DSTO. We kind of have an idea of challenging problems that need to be solved, we're struggling to solve. There's also the problem of classification of problems sometimes. You don't want to put a sensitive problem out there on the internet so everybody knows what you're working on, and that tips off people in other countries overseas to understand, that's an important area, and they use that potentially. So I think we have to be aware of that. But a lot of times we work with people on, bring them in as summer vacation students, give them problems. They end up doing their thesis work with us. There are quite a number of people who do PhDs with us, who are sponsored by a university, etc. So there are ways to do that, but the best way to do is engage and to work with us. But at the same time, DSTO, this has been very clear, is our scientists sometimes have the same problem you talk about, relating to the people in the uniform. It's the boffin versus the warfighter. And occasionally the people who, not occasionally, it does quite often, the person in uniform with a particular problem struggles to articulate the problem from a scientific point of view to what problem to solve. So you can have to be very patient from both sides to have the dialogue to understand what the problem is. And sometimes the problem can be actually solved using undergraduate mathematics, which is great, so you can quickly teach them these methods, but sometimes the problems are almost intractable. And they don't understand why can't you solve these problems. Like logistic problems are generally NP hard, which just means that the more components or the more steps involved in the logistic chain, the more computationally intractable it is. But that's a lot of folk don't appreciate that and think surely should be able to solve that in today's day and age. So there are many problems that you could work on. But I think certainly that some of the problems could be abstracted into other spaces.
Yes, kind of all right.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question about the last slide where you're talking about bringing science and policy closer together.
Yeah.
In terms of in defence, how do you think, what would you like to see done to do that?
Well, I think that certainly, I think one of the first good things that happened in the first principles review was DSTO didn't get outsourced. That's the first good question, policy decision they made. Second one is we're actually standing alone as a group, and interestingly, I think we will be part of the bigger picture and advising through to the Secretary, CDF, etc. I think the important point is, I think certainly for the Vice Chief of Defence group to really understand what DSTO could offer from a policy setting, and also the new policy and intelligence group. So I think there's a lot that could be offered from an OA operations research point of view. So I think the question is to think that through. I mean, a lot of people are very pressured for time, everybody's time poor, but to take a more, what do I need in 3 years, 5 years time, and then you can sometimes set up programs that will start to deliver those results. And not thinking, and we too often we're driven by a monthly cycle or an annual cycle. But I think that the point is we're here for the long term, which is good. So I encourage you to engage with us.
Yeah. Two last questions.
Dr. Zelinsky,
Yeah.
thank you very much for a very informative talk. My name is Kamran. I'm a lecturer here at EFA, and I teach, incidentally, capability options analysis.
Very
So I was just wondering, so you touched upon the role of science and technology in policy making and so on. With this new first principle review coming into defence and lots of changes happening, the capability development departments within defence has evolved over time. I was just wondering, is there a science and technology that has been applied to look into this new kind of policy making?
Thank you for that question. Certainly, as part of the white paper, there's been a force structure review being done, which is what is the optimal mix of all the platforms that need to be adopted, being land, air, or sea, and joint, and space and intelligence, because there's just a finite budget. So what do you get of each, and how do you put it all together to form a very capable ADF, which is at the cutting edge? So we've been involved in that, and it's relied very heavily on operations analysis and operations research work. So, and I believe that generally there's been a sense that we've done that every 5 years. Every time a white paper comes out, you do a force structure review and do that analysis. But it's clear now that in that 5 years window, things change. New technology emerges very quickly, and or a new platform, new options. So, and there's a tendency to stick with the decisions from years ago, which could be obsolete effectively, but you don't want to give up on that because you lose your budget, etc. So the question will be that there's a discussion now about standing up a force structure review team on a more or less permanent basis, and that could be part of the BCDF group. And we believe that DSTO and scientists will other scientists will play a role in that. And when I say other scientists, there is opportunities for groups like RAND and others who've got OA type of skills to contribute analysis of their own. In fact, the government has actually used some of those. So if you've been reading anything about the shipbuilding business, what are the strategic options there and the analysis that's been done there, that was done by RAND. I think DSTO could have probably done that, but then it would have been kind of government advising government. Here they needed sometimes an external group to validate what they were already thinking.
Yes. Russell Boyce from UNSW Canberra.
Yes.
Scientists are often guilty of technology push,
Yes.
and it's not necessarily aligned with user pull, but users don't always get it right, and they don't solicit the right technologies or the right scientific outcomes. So I'm interested in DSTO's approach to balancing that tension, and also how you feed that through into policy.
Yeah, push versus pull. I think you've got to push technology, but you've got to push it to a certain point, and then there is a point where you have to say, no one's going to take this, and we have to stop the work. And then when it gets to a certain point, it needs to be pulled. But I mean, I think a lot of, getting back, you may have heard the story of the Gingerleo over the Horizon Radar. That was a DSTO kind of push. And in the 80s, the Air Force didn't want it. So why are you doing that? And now they love it. It's their number one asset. One of the beloved assets. But it's true, wasn't it? It was a time.
It is a very unique capability.
Yeah, it's a very unique capability. Now very much valued. But I think part of the problem was that DSTO at the time wasn't able to articulate the value from this technology, apart from all you can see over the horizon, and it's pretty far, and they could never really understand what it could do. And part of the problem was the visualization methods. They were very poor. So the scientists could understand that I've picked up some target, but a person in uniform necessarily said, what is this? They couldn't understand the interpretation. So once the human-machine interface was improved, then I think they started to actually really understand the value.
And also it was a time where we actually still believe in strategic warning times.
Yeah.
Whereas the concept of a strategic warning time has been eroded significantly, so the over-horizon radar is now a great value.
That's true. So the strategic context changed. But so I think that was a determined push by DSTO for some years, nearly 15 years of research, 20 years of moving it through the various capability levels, and now it's we're right there, and it's probably the best OTHR capability in the world. There could be other examples. So I mean, space technology, that could be one. We're doing a bit of work there. But if in 10 years' time we are where we are today, you might say, you know what, it's probably time to think about another part. And we have to take all those judgments. You make bets, and at some point you need pull. And at the same time, we've also got to be always responsive. There are very great leaders in the ADF. They're visionary. They can see ahead. They can see where they need to go. And they can be asking you to say, I think we need something like this. And in fact, they plant an idea for a new technology capability. So it can be pulled through. And certainly I can think of some of the electronic warfare concepts we've worked up. A lot of those have come from our warfighters, not from scientists.
Thank you very much for today. You've given us as a society 2 challenges. I believe that also challenge is to maintain the caliber of this seminar to this outstanding level. And I hope our
sample size of 1 is not enough.
We will help in doing that. And the second challenge is that you've given us enough evidence that we need to continue to provide more evidence as a society to the community and to government. Thank you very much. Please keep in touch. We are hoping that our next seminar will be in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.